Hi, in this lesson we're going to make the doorknob, and I want to create a sphere for that. And I'm going to move this sphere over to here. Okay, to about here maybe. And also want to bring it up a bit to about here. Yeah, that looks alright. And let's see, in the attribute manager, go to the object tab, and I want to increase the radius to about 140, and I'll bring the segments down to 12. Okay, now let's make this sphere editable and activate the rotate tool, and then press and hold the shift key, and then click and drag on this red handle and rotate this sphere by 90 degrees so that the original poles face in this direction. Now let's go to the object axis tool and reset the object axis to 0, like so. And next I want to go to the right view, hit on the keyboard, and maybe scale this sphere down a bit on the z-axis, like so. Go to the edge mode and use the rectangle selection tool, select these edges, scale these a bit more, just click and drag in the viewport to scale these edges on all three axes, like so. And I think that looks okay. Yep. Let's go back to the right view, go to the polygon mode and use the rectangle selection tool again to select these polygons. Right click and extrude them, and I'm going to extrude these with an offset of 0. Okay, and then move them back on the z-axis. Let's undo this. We have to deactivate snapping here. Now let's move these back a bit and then align them on the z-axis. Let's make this door mounting base invisible. Go to the point mode, and I'm going to select this point here and delete it. Go back to the right view, make the door mounting base visible again, and select these points here and move them back to the door mounting base, like so. Okay, right now we have very little detail on this doorknob, and maybe I'll bring this up a bit. Okay, and if you want to have more detail for your render, you could use a hypernapse object. So let's create a hypernapse object and make this sphere a child of the hypernapse. I'm going to rename this to doorknob. Let's rename this to doorknob as well. Okay, now you can see that we have a very round object, and if you get a little closer and render this, you can also see that we have these little grooves here, and this is why you shouldn't use triangles when you use hypernapse. Let's go to the front view and switch the hypernapse off, select the doorknob, go to the polygon mode. This is a problem that we can fix very easily. Let's use the live selection tool, select these two polygons, and go to functions, melt. Okay, and I'm going to do this for the other polygons here too, only this time I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut, which is UZ, to speed things up a bit. Okay, select these two, melt them, and these, and these, and these. Now if we go to the perspective view, switch the hypernapse back on and render this, you can see that we don't have these grooves anymore. And also, if we use hypernapse, we should define this edge a bit better here. So let's switch the hypernapse back off again, go to the edge mode, and let's use the loop selection tool to select these edges here. Right click and bevel them, and this time I want to use one subdivision, and I want to switch the type to convex. And I'll just left click and drag on the viewport, and I'm going to use an offset of 3, maybe 3.5. Okay, and if we switch the hypernurbs back on and render this, we now have an edge that looks much nicer. Okay, and I think I'm going to bring this hypernurbs detail down a bit in the subdivision editor. Let's make this 1. And what I want to create next is another object that's supposed to be the mounting for this doorknob. And first of all, I want to select this doorknob, go to the model tool and use axis center to center the axis on this object. And now I want to create a cylinder. Okay, I'm going to move this forward a bit, and I'm going to call this Doorknob Mounting. And in the attribute manager, go to the object tab, and I want to change the orientation to +Z, bring the height segments down to 1, and reduce the rotation segments to maybe 20. And also on the caps tab, bring the cap segments down to 1. And next we have to position this object in the center of the doorknob, and we can easily do that by going to Functions, Transfer. And now let's drag this doorknob from the Object Manager down to here in the Attribute Manager into this field, and then hit Apply, and this will position the doorknob mounting in the center of our doorknob. Okay, now let's move this new object back a bit. Select it again, and in the Attribute Manager I'm going to change the height to about 15 and move this back a bit more to here, and I want to bring the radius up to, let's see, maybe 85. Okay, and this looks about okay. And now let's select the doorknob and the door mounting base, hit Alt G on the keyboard to place these in a null object, and I'm going to call this door mounting and make this invisible. Next, let's select the doorknob mounting, make it editable, go to the point mode, then go to Functions, Optimize, and hit OK, and this will reduce the number of points from 82 to 42. Now let's delete this point here at the back. Go to the edge mode and use the loop selection tool to select these edges. Save the selection and rename it to Edges for Beveling. Okay, and let's move this into the null object here, into the door mounting null object. And I want to add one last detail. We're going to have some screws to fix this door mounting to the door blade. And again, I'm going to use a cylinder, and in the Attribute Manager, let's change the settings. First of all, I want to move it forward a bit. Change the orientation to +Z again, and bring the height segments down to 1, and I'm going to reduce the rotation segments to 6. I don't want very much detail here. And on the caps tab again, bring the cap segments down to 1. Let's move this up a bit, and I'm going to reduce the font shading to 43, and let's see, let's bring the radius down to 20 maybe, and reduce the height to 10. Okay, now let's move this back to here and to here. Maybe just for now I'm going to apply this glass material to this screw. Let's rename this to screw. Okay, go to the front view, and let's see, I think I want to bring this a bit down and over to here, and maybe a bit up again. Okay, and now let's make this door mounting invisible. Select the screw, make it editable, go to the point mode, use functions optimize to get rid of all of the overlapping points here, and this will reduce the number of points to 14. And again, let's delete this point at the back of the object. Go to the edge mode and use the loop selection tool to select these edges. Save the selection and rename it to edges for beveling. Now let's go back to the model tool and make the door mounting visible again. Let's make copies of this screw and position it on the door mounting. So I'm going to make one copy, and since we modeled this object in the center of the Cinema 4D grid, we just have to change this value on the x-axis by making it positive. Okay, apply, and this should move our copy over to here. And now let's copy these two screws and make the position on the y-axis negative. Apply this, and this will position these copies down here. And I'm going to select the 4 screws, hit Alt G, and rename the null object to screws. Put it in the door mounting null object, and now let's say activate the move tool. We have to scale this object down, and first of all I want to center the object axis here, so I'm using axis center, and this time we need to activate include children and use all objects. Hit execute, and now if we scale this object down on all 3 axes, everything will scale evenly. Okay, I also want to move this over to minus 350 on the x-axis and to minus 1300 on the z-axis to position it roughly where the door is. And now let's make this door and the ground floor visible. Okay, then activate the scale tool and just click and drag in the viewport and scale this door mounting down. Okay, let's zoom in a little and move this up and back a bit, and we need to scale it some more. I'm going to move it over a bit and back a bit. Okay, and this is still a bit large, I think, so let's scale it again. Okay, and I think this looks about right. Let's move this up to 100 on the y-axis. Do a quick test render here. Maybe apply this dark glass material to the door mounting so we can see a little better how it looks. Maybe I'll bring this back to 95 again on the y-axis. Okay, and if you want to, you can make a copy of this door mounting and rename the first one to door mounting right and the second one to door mounting left. And I'm going to move this over to here and maybe adjust the position of this one a bit, move it over to here a bit so that it's roughly in the center between these two white areas here. Okay. And now let's select the two door mountings, hit Alt G to place them in a null object, and I'm going to rename this to door mountings and make this a child of the door null object, and make the door a child of the ground floor, like so. And now let's make this ground floor ceiling visible again. And I want to do one last thing here, and that is select the ground floor ceiling, go to the polygon mode, select this top polygon and move it up to 52 by 10 units on the y-axis. I think it looks a little better if we make this a bit thicker. Okay, and now let's see how this looks. Let's do a quick test render. And this concludes the first big chapter of this tutorial. So now we're finished with the ground floor, and in the next bit we're going to move up in the world and start working on the first floor. So thanks for watching this, and I'll see you then. Bye bye. Hi and welcome back. Before we start working on the upper floors, I want to change some things here. First of all, I'm going to double click on this white material, on this white stone material, and rename it to white. Then click on the glass material, rename it to dark. This is because I'm using these as dummy materials only. If you want to, you can create more materials, use different colors and rename everything properly, but I'm going to keep this as simple as possible here. And also let's make this ground floor invisible. Select the ground floor walls, make them visible. Make sure you're in the polygon mode, and then use the loop selection tool to select these polygons up here and these ones down there. And we need to deselect the polygons at the door. Now let's delete these polygons, then go to the front view, hit O on the keyboard. And I'm using the rectangle selection tool here with only select visible elements deactivated. And now just click and drag the rectangle selection tool over the entire side of this building to select these polygons down here, and this should select these bottom polygons of the windows on all four sides. Now let's delete these as well. Okay, and now we can make this ground floor wall invisible again, and also I'm going to switch off the ground floor for the renderer. Next, let's drag the first floor object out of the temp null object, and I want to increase the height of this wall. So I'm going to bring this up to 340 units on the y-axis. Let's go to the front view. Next, let's go to the edge mode and select all of the window edges. I want these windows to be 170 units high, which in this case they already are because we scaled the entire wall up a bit. Let's copy this value because I also want each of these windows to be 170 units wide. So I'm going to select all of these edges here and then just paste this value in the field for the x-axis and apply. And now let's do the same thing for the other windows here. Okay, and now we can make a copy of this wall. Go to the model tool and activate the move tool. We have to use snapping now. In the attribute manager on the snap settings tab, enable snapping and deselect point, and I want to snap to edges here. And now we can move this wall copy up and bring it back down until it snaps to this bottom object here. I'm going to make another copy and move this one up and also snap it back down like so. And now we can select all three objects, right click and connect these. delete the original objects, select the new one, go to the point mode, make sure that everything is deselected, and then optimize the object. And we can also get rid of some of the polygons on this new object, so let's go to the polygon mode and use the live selection tool to select these polygons here. Then right click and melt them. And now we can select these ones. And again right click and melt them. Then go to the point mode and delete these points and these points. Activate the model tool again, and I'm going to make the ground floor visible. Now let's move this new wall up here and snap it back down to the ground floor ceiling. And that's it for this part. In the next bit we're going to make the basic geometry for the 4th floor, and I'm going to model that from scratch because we're going to have arched windows on the 4th floor, and we're going to have to do that a little differently than these walls here. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you then. Bye bye. Okay, so now let's continue working on these upper floors. First of all, let's go to the front view and switch to the edge mode. I'm going to select all of these window edges here, and I want to move these down by -15 units on the y-axis. And now I'm going to select these bottom edges of the windows and move these down by another 4 units. And this is the amount by which we're going to extrude the window sills back up later on. Now let's make this ground floor invisible and create a rectangle spline. And this is the first window spline for the 4th floor. I'm going to change the size of this spline to 170 by 170 units to make it the same size as the windows on this wall here. Let's rename this to wall, and I'm going to make this invisible. Okay, let's select this spline again, make it editable, and I'm going to make a copy of this rectangle spline, and this is going to be our reference spline for snapping. Now let's select our window spline again, and in the attribute manager I'm going to change its type to Bezier. Go to the point mode, select the bottom 2 points, and then go to structure, edit spline, hard interpolation. Next we're going to shape the arch on this window spline. And just to make sure that we're using the same grid spacing here, let's go to edit configure. And if you take a look at the attribute manager, on the back tab you can find the settings for the world grid here at the bottom. And I'm using the standard settings here, so grid spacing and lines should be set to 100, major lines should be set to 10, and the dynamic grid should be set to 110. Okay, now let's activate the move tool. We have to change the snap settings here, make sure that snapping is activated, and deselect edge and select spline. And now I'm going to select this point on the left here, and then left click and drag on this handle and snap it to our reference spline. And don't worry about the length of these handles, it's a bit hard to control right now, but we're going to fix that in a minute. Now let's select this point on the right, and again left click and drag on this handle, snap it to the reference spline, and you can see that this arch here is a bit uneven. So let's change that. First of all, we're going to change the snap settings, deselect spline and select grid line, and I also want to deactivate the x-axis and the z-axis, and this will restrict movement to the y-axis, so we can't accidentally move these handles to the left and to the right. And now just left click and drag on the handle of this right point and snap it to this horizontal grid line here. And I'm going to select this point on the left as well, left click and drag on this handle and snap it to the same horizontal grid line. Now we can see that we have an even arch here. And next I want to make this arch a little bigger, and this time I only want to move these top parts of the handles, and you can do that by pressing and holding the shift key. Then again left click and drag on this handle, and I'm going to bring this up by 1, 2, 3, 4 of these little grid units. And let's do the same thing over here. Bring this up by 4 grid units. And now I'm going to switch the x-axis and the z-axis back on, deactivate snapping, and I'm going to move these points down. And we can't snap the top of this arch to our reference spline because we don't have a point here that could snap to the spline. So we have to eyeball this. Let's move these 2 points up until the top of this arch overlaps with the reference spline, like so. And now we can get rid of this reference spline, select our window spline and duplicate it. We need 6 copies, and we need to enable movement, and again I'm going to move each spline copy by 350 units on the x-axis. Deactivate rotation, hit apply, and now I'm going to select all of these window splines. Hit Alt G to place these in a new null object. Get rid of rectangle copies, select the new null object, go to the move tool, and now this object axis is centered on the 7 splines. It's the same thing that we did with the windows on the ground floor wall. And now we can go to the model tool and center these splines on the grid by changing the X position to 0. Next, let's create another rectangle spline for the wall. I'm going to make this 2600 by 340 units. And this is the same height as the height of each of these floors on this wall here. Okay, now let's make this wall spline editable, and I'm going to connect the wall spline and the window splines, and if we connect them as they are now, what happens is that we lose the arches, and this is due to the settings, to the different settings of these splines. Let's undo this. If you select our wall spline, you can see that its type is linear, and the type of these window splines is Bezier. So we have to change the type of our wall spline to Bezier as well. Then go to the point mode, hit Ctrl A, then go to Structure, Edit Spline, Hard Interpolation, and now select the window splines as well. Right click and connect these. And before I get rid of the original splines, I want to drag this left window spline out of this null object, and this is going to be the basis for our arched stone frame. Okay, now let's delete this null object and the original wall spline. And next I want to select all of the window points on this new spline and move them down by -15 on the y-axis. Then select these bottom points, move them down by another 4 units. And again I'm going to do this for this stone frame spline. Select all of its points, move them down by -15, and then select the bottom points and move these down by another 4 units. Next I'm going to select our wall spline and then press and hold the Alt key and create an Extrude Nurbs object. And again we have this default movement here, which we don't need, so I'm going to change the movement of this Extrude Nurbs to 0 in the attribute manager to get this flat wall. And before I convert this Extrude Nurbs object, we need to bring down the detail on these window arches. Now I do want a lot of detail on the stone frame later on, but since this stone frame is going to cover the entire opening of this window, we don't really need a lot of detail on the wall itself. So let's select this rectangle spline, and I'm getting a little closer here, and we can change the detail by changing the angle setting here. And if we bring this up, we're going to reduce the amount of detail on this spline, but you can also see that we get this uneven shape for these arched sections here. So I'm going to use a different setting for the intermediate points. Let's switch this to natural and bring the detail down by reducing the number to 5. You can see that we have less detail now, but even shapes. Okay, so now let's select this Extrude Nurbs object, make it editable, and you can see that we have quite a lot of points here that we don't need, so we need to clean this up a bit. And I want to delete this right half of the wall and do the work that we have to do on the left part, and then complete the wall again by using a symmetry object. So let's go to the knife tool, and I'm going to use the same settings for this knife tool that I used before. So on the options tab, make sure that restrictor selection is deactivated. Make sure that you create n-gons, and I'm using the constraint option here with an angle of 90 degrees. On the snap settings tab, enable snapping, and I'm going to snap to point, deselect grid line. Okay, now let's make a cut here in the middle and from here to here. And we could also cut from here to here and from here to here. And now use the rectangle selection tool to select and delete these points. Okay, now let's get rid of some of these points here. On the outside of this wall, we only need the corner points, so we can get rid of all the points in between. And on these windows, it's basically the same thing. We only need the corner points here, and we only need 2 points to define the straight line between the corner and the position where the arch starts. So we can get rid of all of these points here and delete these ones down there. And let's do the same thing here. Delete all of these points and get rid of these ones. Okay, then activate the knife tool again. You can use the same settings as before, and I'm going to cut this n-gon now. So let's cut here and then make some horizontal cuts like so. And I'm going to cut here and here. And the rest of these cuts I'm going to make to the top of the wall, like so. Okay, and now we have to align and reposition some of these points, which is again the same thing that we did on the ground floor wall. Don't have to change anything for this bottom row, and on the second row from the bottom, just select one of these original window points as a reference, copy the Y position, and we only have one new point here, so we only have to paste the Y position here to align these points. And the same for this row, just select this point as a reference, copy the Y position, select the only new point, paste the Y position, and again the same thing here, paste the Y position, select this point, paste the position. And for these vertical rows of points, we have to do this a little differently. If I switch the display to lines here, you can see that our stone frame spline fits perfectly down here, but it needs to be inside this window opening up here, and I don't want to scale down this spline, but instead we're going to move the points on the wall so that this spline fits into this opening. And what I'm going to do here is select one of these original window points as a reference and copy the X position, and select this entire row of points, paste the X position, and align these points on the X-axis by changing the size to 0. And here I'm going to select this point, copy the X position, select the point above it, and you can see sometimes this axis is in the way, and you can switch that off by going to display filter, axis, or you could use the keyboard shortcut, which is much more comfortable in my opinion. So hit Alt D to bring the axis back, and hit Alt D to switch it off. Now let's select this point up here, copy the X position, paste the X position. Okay, apply, and do the same thing here. Copy the X position and paste it here, and the same here. Copy the X position, paste it here, and on the right side of this window, again I'm going to select this point, copy the X position, select all of these points, paste the X position, and align these points by making the size 0. And now you can see that our spline fits into this opening here. We still have to move these top 3 points of the wall up a bit. I'm going to do that later. First of all, I'm going to align the rest of these points on this wall. So over here, select another reference point, copy the X position, select this entire row, paste the X position and align the points. Okay, then select this one, copy the X position, select this point, paste it, and I'm going to do the same thing here and here. And here let's select this one as a reference point, copy the X position, select the entire row, paste the X position and align these points. And just do the same thing for this window here. And again here I'm only going to copy the X position, select this point, paste the X position, repeat this step here and here, and select this one as a reference, copy the X position, select the entire row, paste the X position and align these points. Now let's select this one, copy the X position, select the entire row, paste the X position, align the points, and here I'm going to copy the X position, select this point and paste it. And this row in the middle here has to be at 0 on the X axis, and the size has to be 0. So these need to be right in the center for the symmetry object to work properly. Okay, and now that we have positioned and aligned all of these points, we need to move these top 3 points of the opening up a bit. Okay, I'm going to switch the axis back on by hitting Alt D, and let's see. Let's move these points up by 3 units, should be enough. So enter +3 on the y-axis here, hit apply, and you can see that our spline now is inside this opening. Okay. And now with this wall already selected, press and hold the Alt key and create a symmetry object. Make this symmetry object editable. Drag our wall out of the symmetry and delete the symmetry object. And also let's get rid of this polygon selection tag here. I'll select the wall again and select these 2 points in the middle, delete them, go to the edge mode and use the bridge tool to bridge these 2 edges. Then go to the polygon mode. I'm going to switch the display back to grow shading lines here. Hit Ctrl A. We need to reverse the normals here. Okay, and we can get rid of some of these polygons on this wall. So let's select these polygons here. Right click and melt them. I forgot these 2. Right click, melt these as well. Go to the point mode, select these points and delete them. Okay, and that's it for this bit. Let's take a quick break and continue working on these walls in the next lesson. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you then. Bye bye. Okay, so now that the basic structure of this 4th floor is complete, we're going to put everything together. go to the model tool and select the wall and the stone frame spline. I'm going to move these to minus 1300 on the Z-axis, and then hit Alt-G on the keyboard to place these two objects in a null object. Let's go to the front view, activate the Object Axis tool, and go to the Move tool. Let's change the snapping here to edge and midpoint and deselect point. And I'm going to move this object axis down until it snaps to the bottom edge of the wall. Go back to the model tool, and I'm going to make this wall here visible. And now let's drag our null object up to here and snap it back down to the wall object. Okay, and now we can drag these two objects out of the null object again and delete this null object. Select the fourth floor and the wall, right click and connect these two. And we can now delete the original objects. I'm going to rename this to walls and go to the point mode. Make sure that everything's deselected and then optimize this object. And we can get rid of some of the polygons here, so let's go to the polygon mode and select these polygons here. Right click and melt them, and then let's select, oops, again the axis is a bit in the way, so I'm going to hit Alt-D to switch it off. And now select these polygons, right click and melt them as well. Go to the point mode and select and delete these points. Next I'm going to duplicate this wall. We need 3 copies, and deactivate movement, enable rotation, and the angle has to be 90 degrees as usual on the x-axis. Apply these settings, and now let's select the 4 walls, right click and connect these. Delete the original objects, select the new object. Again, make sure that everything's deselected, and then optimize it. Now let's go to the polygon mode, hit Ctrl A to select all of the polygons, right click and extrude these. And we need to create caps this time, and the offset has to be minus 30, which is the thickness of the wall again. Now let's hit Ctrl A again and reverse the normals here. Go to the top view, switch to the point mode and use the rectangle selection tool to select all of these points and delete them. So now we should have only this front wall left. I'm going to center the axis on this object so that it's a bit easier to rotate around it. Now let's go to the polygon mode and let's use the loop selection tool to select this polygon loop down here of the first window on the left. Right click and split these polygons off. And I'm going to rename these to window sills. Let's make a copy of this, rename it to window frames, and let's make another copy and rename these to stone frames. Okay, and I'm going to select all 3 of them and put them in the temp null object for the time being. Let's select our walls again, and now let's continue selecting the inside of these window openings here. All of these areas will be covered by the stone frames later on, so we don't have a use for these polygons. Okay, almost done now. Okay, let's delete these polygons. And before we duplicate this wall, we need to make sure that the object axis is reset to 0 on the z-axis. So it needs to be 0 on the z-axis and on the x-axis. Apply this, hit Alt D to bring the object axis, to bring this axis here back. And now let's go to Functions, Duplicate, and we can use the same settings as before. So this time we just need to hit Apply. And again, I'm going to connect these 4 walls. Delete the original objects, select this new one, go to the point mode, make sure that everything's deselected, and optimize the object. And now let's go back to the polygon mode and use the loop selection again to select these polygons up here and these ones down there, delete them, and now we should have 1024 polygons left. And this is the basic structure for our walls. In the next bit we're going to start making the details for the windows. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you then. Bye bye.